Alrighty, sorry about that. Thank you, everyone. Alright, so you'll see I'm just in layers right now. So here's my image I want to mask. One of the questions I always get is, how do I even put these things in order? Well, obviously I've got it set up here so it looks beautiful already when I open the image, but normally what people would have to do is go open their own image, and you can do File, Browse Backgrounds, and select a background you want. I've already got one in this PSD ready to go, but by clicking and holding, dragging above or below the layer, you'll see that you can just do it. Another issue actually is some people don't realize you need to make sure you're selecting the top layer before you click Mask up here on the top right. So I've got my layer I want to mask out and my background layer ready to go. Like I mentioned earlier, it's selected, click Mask. So when you see that preparing the image thing, it's really just segmenting the image. I'll show you right now. Down here, one of the most important tools I think that everyone should know about is the previews. So you have your original, you got on a white background. Nothing's been masked yet, so you cannot see any of these previews, but down here are the previews. And if you like keyboard shortcuts, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. Another thing I would like to mention before I even get started here, I'm sorry if this is a little bit generic for you experienced users out there, but when you initially launch the software for the first time, you're going to start out in the basic mode up here. But what I've always used is the advanced mode, and you'll notice when I click advanced, more tools populate on the left side. So I definitely would recommend for anyone just to jump straight to the advanced mode. But my first step in this image is going to take a look at the drop brush. The next tip I'll offer to anybody is just make sure you have the inspector open all the time. The inspector is this little eye down here in the bottom left corner. Make sure you have that open all the time. It'll show you what the settings are for whatever tool that you have selected on the left-hand side. A lot of people don't realize that, and if you're using Mask Pro without any inspector, then you're probably lost to begin with. So the first thing I'm going to do is view the segments here. And you'll see how Mask Pro, when it originally opened and had that progress bar go across, that the segments, this is what I've got here. So it's segmented the image like this. I am going to bring down the segment size to about 2 to make the segments smaller so we can get more detail out of this. You'll see that saves a lot of that veil there already. I'm going to go back to composite mode. Or I could just click the 5 key, the number 5 on my keyboard, and that would have done the same thing other than using that down there. I'm just going to go ahead and click here. This is my drop brush up here on the top left corner. The first thing I ever use is the drop brush. And I'm just going to do one big long stroke along the left-hand side in every color range that you see. Let go. Refining. Well, it looks awesome. Of course, it's perfect mask, right? Thank you for the sympathy laugh, Brian. Next up, I am just going to grab my magic brush here. So the magic brush normally would follow along with whatever keep and drop colors you've selected. For example, if you wanted to select keep colors like her hair, her wedding veil, her dress, and then select drop colors, you could do that if you wanted to, just by go ahead and click on those ranges, and you'd notice they would populate over here in the keep and drop set. I'm just doing this for example. I'm not going to actually use these for this particular image because my favorite way to mask an image is the easy way. Start out with the magic brush without any colors selected at all, and select an area in which the how do I put this best? You see here with the original preview, we've got different color tone from the bottom to the top. We got a dark blue and kind of a greenish on the bottom. So if I select a color here and begin to paint away, it's going to capture everything that I've selected within this brush itself. So within this circle, every color that I select and begin to paint away with, it will try to identify that color and remove it. And this is without any keep and drop color selected at all. So let's go back to our composite view, and I think I'm going to select right here because it's got a little bit of everything in it, and I'm just holding down and going across the veil just like this. And you'll notice it does a great job. It removes all those colors in that specific range, and it gives us a really awesome transparent look to this veil. For this section in here, I'm just going to use the drop brush again, and it does an awesome job there. Next tool I'll go over here is the refine brush. This refine brush can be a blessing or a curse for depending on the user experience. Sometimes it does a good job, and sometimes it kicks out something that isn't typically what you're looking for. It'll make it hazy, but here in the hair, I'll do that once, and you'll see it did a great job identifying the edges. And we've almost got a perfect mask here. I think I'm almost done, but you didn't come here to see an obvious image and watch somebody show you how the software is advertised. You came here to hopefully learn some new things. If there's any questions, Brian, about some of the basic functions so far, I'm going to try to get into more intuitive operations now.
What you can do, if you want, is repeat this process, but if you can, open it up in Photoshop and show them how they can do the same thing like through Photoshop.
Sure. So
if you want to just quit out there, send it, drag it onto the Photoshop icon and do the exact same thing.
Great. Thanks, Brian. I will show them how to do that right now. Let's just go ahead and close this. I'm not going to save for the time being, but same image dragged into Photoshop. And the sequence of layers needs to be essentially the same. Excuse me. You'll notice, obviously, this image has been prepared, so I've got my layer on the top and the bottom, and I got my backup layer there. And once you get the layers organized in the proper stack, if you want to call it that, in Photoshop, you want to make sure you're on the top layer, your background layer's there. It's not necessary that you have to have a background layer. You could mask something without a background layer, but it would show up as transparent.
Can you explain, people are asking why your file already has a background. Can you explain that it's already a layered PSD file?
Exactly. I'm sorry. This file is already prepared with a background. And here's another question that just popped in my mind that I get all the time on the telephone is, you'll notice here when I'm using the independent standalone application, if I go to File, Browse Backgrounds, I have all these backgrounds to choose from within the standalone application. And people call me all the time and are like, I cannot find the backgrounds, and I ask them, are you trying to access it with Photoshop? And they say, yes. Well, they don't show up in Photoshop, unfortunately. The only way to get these built-in backgrounds, like these cool skies, inside gradients, and everything that you would want, you have to do it through a standalone, or Lightroom and Aperture will actually give you the same user experience as a standalone. But through Photoshop, these backgrounds aren't available, unfortunately. That's something that we're working on, but let's take a look here. I've already got my background built in here, like Brian mentioned earlier, because this was a layered file to begin with, and I already had it prepared for this presentation. So hopefully that answers that question. Essentially, it's the same process from here. Now that I'm in Photoshop, I can simply just go up to File, Automate, Perfect Mask. Another great way to get to On1 software within Photoshop is using the window extensions On1, and that is going to bring up the On1 palette, which is an awesome tool that you can just simply dock over here on the right-hand side within your layers, channels, paths, and everything else. So if you just want to get straight to it from there, you can do it that way. I'm not going to go ahead and launch it from within here. Hopefully that addresses the question. But what I do want to do is move on to my next image, which really isn't very easy at all. I got a lot of laughs from some of my colleagues here when I showed them the image I wanted to work on today for this webinar, because they didn't think I was going to be able to do it. But that's where the customers that I deal with usually come to a standstill, is they're working on images that not necessarily are doing a very good job because, this program works on a color-based scheme, so if the foreground and background are so similar in color range, it makes it very difficult to get a good mask. So you'll see here in this image I have up, I've got a lot of white and a sort of a blown out sky there. There's a few tricks I've learned. This program has kind of got some nuances and it takes a little time to get used to, so hopefully I can share those with you now. This one right here, for example, I can tell already, how am I going to save every single rope and pole that's coming up these boats. I'm sorry, I'm not a sailor. I don't know the technical name for those, but for example, this is one trick I'll let you in on right now. If I make a copy of this layer here in layers, and I change the blending mode to something different. Let's try multiply, for example. You can see an improvement in the contrast between the foreground and background here. I'm going to go ahead and just leave the multiply on, and I'm going to take that layer into perfect mask instead of my original. When I get back, I'll show you how I'm just going to change the blending mode back to normal when I'm done with my mask. And this is one way to sort of work around if you're trying to mask a blonde in a wheat field or a polar bear in the Arctic. This can be a helpful tool, or trick, I guess I should call it. It's not necessarily a tool, but let's jump into perfect mask here. Any questions for me yet, Brian?
No, I'm handling them right now. Thank you, though.
Great. All right. So you'll see this time, since I left in the advanced mode, I started in the advanced mode, so we don't need to worry about that anymore. For this particular image, I'm going to go ahead and I can tell that I can get rid of a lot of this just by simply taking my drop brush and removing all that upper sky. And you'll see now this is where the nitty-gritty comes. This is the grayscale view. I just clicked the 3 button on my keyboard. That took me to the grayscale view. I normally like to operate in this view when I'm doing things that are difficult, transparent objects. It really gives me a good idea of what the results might look like. I'm going to try my first trick. I always do is just grab the magic brush and not use a single keep or drop color and see what kind of results I get. Now every time I click, I'm taking a sample of the original area. So for example, if I click here, I'm sampling that area. And as I begin to drag it down and use it, it'll remove everything in that color tone that I originally sampled with each click. Each click is doing this. I click again in the middle here, and I might lose too much. So Command-Alt-Z is going to go back for me, or you can go up to Edit, Undo Stroke, Control-Alt-Z will do the same thing on a Windows machine. So I'm going to sample down each time because remember, the image has different color tones all around it. So every sample I take is going to give me a different result. Now you notice I didn't put a background on this image before I started because, quite honestly, I don't know what I'm going to do with this image. Let's face it, this isn't maybe your typical image that you would want to mask on because it doesn't necessarily have the transparency. You got the horizon in the background, which is kind of grayed out there, and how are we going to make this look like a realistic image? And my answer to those questions are, if you're working on images that you're masking out, it's like, from this point on, aren't we already affecting the integrity of the image? So we are changing everything about it. So if it's going to bother you that every single rope is not showing up as I do this, I don't have a good answer to that. People understand that software is going to have its limitations, but it does a great job saving me a bunch of time here in this process to be able to click on each one of these things, and as I'm clicking, I'm removing all the haze in there. And you can see the slight resemblance of ropes of them, but I can touch that up later and I'll show you how. As I begin to do this, I'm just going to go along. Any questions for me yet, Brian?
One second.
And again, just to reiterate, I'm just clicking, like I'll click right here, and I'll come straight down, and I'll get rid of any residual in there. Another great tip I have is to use the zoom tool. Get in there and really get close, work in sections, because most likely your image has got so many different color tones, this will be necessary. Back out of here a little bit. And I plan on covering some more of the tools as I go on here, so just bear with me as I get through some of this basic masking. Well, I made a mistake. What do I do now? How do I get that back? That's a common question I get all the time. My way of doing that normally is just to grab the regular brush, which is right above the magic brush, and you'll notice my inspector down here. Just paint it back in. I'll just paint anything back in that I make a mistake on, or if I'm not happy with it.
So some people are asking, are you clicking and dragging, or are you just pressing once and then dragging?
Good question. I'm clicking and...
Repeat the question.
Sure. I'm sorry. So people are asking, am I clicking and holding, or am I just clicking and then dragging? What I'm doing when I click down once is essentially I'm making a sample. I'll grab my magic brush again here, give you a good example. When I click one time and take a sample, let's get real close. If I click one time, now I'm going to hold. And as I hold this and drag it, it's going to take out any colors that I have selected in my selection there. So everything within this circle is going to be removed if it matches that color range as I hold and brush around. Hopefully that takes care of that question. Let me get back here. That's just Command-Alt-Z or Control-Alt-Z if you're on Mac. On Windows, excuse me. So I'm continuing to do this image here. And this particular image isn't easy, and I wasn't planning on pulling any punches today because I know what it's like to have a real-life image, not just a typical advertisement like I mentioned earlier with obvious borders and color differences. This is a complicated image. When I first took this photo, I never thought of having to mask it, but I decided I wanted to do something maybe a little bit more creative with it, maybe go for the popular HDR look that Brian's always touting here and does an awesome job at. So I plan on I intend to essentially mask out this image, put a new, more dramatic sky in the background, and add a couple effects with our Perfect Effects program to kind of give it some more punch, sharpness. We'll see if we have time to go over that today, but you'll see here I'm just clicking, holding, and going up and down with this tool. Now, a lot of people have transparent objects like hair and things like that they send to us, and they're always saying, I cannot get this masked out, and I'm sorry I didn't have a better image to do this on today, but on that note, what I would say when you are using keep and drop colors, like if I wanted to keep certain colors, with this particular image it's not a great example, but if I wanted to keep certain colors I could select them and you can see them populate here. The reason this isn't a good image is you'll see I want to get rid of some of these. They're so similar in color tone, it's like if I use the magic brush and I'm using the color decontamination with it on, I am going to get a little bit of residual like that. You'll see, well, it's keeping certain colors and it's removing others. That's why I don't always necessarily use that if I don't have to, but it does work good with transparent hair a lot of the times, as long as you can keep the keep and drop colors a different enough tone. All right, we're back, and I click, hold, bring down. I'm going to have to delete these. That's why it's still doing that. I'm sorry. Go ahead and delete these. click, hold, and bring down, and like I said earlier, it's just going to sample everything I took in that selection and remove it from the image. We'll get into some of the other tools here. Just let me finish this up. I'm sorry about the silence there, but try to do the best I can to cover all the tools and when they're appropriate to use and why I would use them, because these aren't always the only tools that I use. Depending on the image, I could use anything from keep and drop colors the whole time to just maybe the fancy remove background thing over here that does an awesome job if you have an obvious background. But I know from my time as a support representative, all the experience I've gathered is not everybody has perfect images like that to mask out. So here we are. This is our grayscale view, and that's the 3 on my keyboard. I got it memorized. When I use this view, I can see that I have all this haze left over down here, and that's where I want to click and take my samples from to make sure I remove anything that may be left behind by the original mask.
Nathan, when you get a chance, can you go over again using the keep and drop droppers?
Definitely. Brian asked me if I could review the keep and drop colors just a little bit. This particular image isn't great for it, but I'm sure I could cover that easily. The keep and drop colors are essential tools for using this program a lot of the time. Quite honestly, if I can get away without having to use them, I will, just by clicking and taking those samples. You notice every time I click and take a sample, it'll remove it, but let's take another look here. What I wanted to cover now is this adjustments over here on the right. Now that I've kind of cleaned this up as best I could, I apologize for any residue that may be left behind. It's simply to save you guys the time from having to watch me mask this entire thing. I like the adjustments tool for images like this because it'll work with the black and white contrast. So here's white and here's black. You see it there. And in my adjustment mask, I can play around with how I want to bring that white back in, possibly. Maybe I want to grow it a tad. We can see by doing that, if I grow it slightly, am I bringing back any information that was removed by doing all the masking I have previously? Or by doing the opposite, you can see what bringing some of the black contrast back would be by either shrinking or growing that. Noisy images are the most difficult to mask. If you have a noisy image, you're probably really frustrated with it. I don't typically try to mask things that are noisy just because I haven't had good experience with them, but that's one thing that I will mention if you have reached your wit's end, and a lot of the people I have talked to sometimes have gotten that far, but you'll see there that adjusting these a lot of the times is a easy way to get rid of a lot of the edges or refine the mask after you've done a lot of the lifting already. So I'm just going to click OK and see how that turned out. I notice I did bring back a lot of the blue haze in doing that, but I did retain a lot of my original information that I want to keep. As I mentioned when I first started this image, this isn't a particular image that qualifies as masking, but I thought it was a good example to show people how some of the tools could be used to really, if you are determined to have an image masked and it's really difficult, that there is some tricks out there, like those adjustments I just showed you. You'll see it can be a little intensive sometimes, and this is why people, I think, tend to get frustrated with it and give us a call and want to know, hey, I'm doing everything I can. I've watched every video you guys offer, and I still don't understand how this software is supposed to operate. Well, that's why I begged Brian, and begged is the correct word for it, to come in here and give a little rundown of the product and how I like to use it. We'll go back to our mask view and let me cover a few other of the tools, and then I'm going to go back and talk about the keep and drop colors again, because those are vital tools for this application. But first is the chisel tool. After the drop brush tool and the magic brush tool, the chisel tool is probably my next most used tool that I use. Think of it as a chisel on a rock, and you're just chipping away at the rock with the chisel, and each chip brings off a little bit. That's exactly what the chisel tool will do to your mask. This is particularly high chisel amount. I normally have it anywhere between 25 and 10, as low as 5 sometimes. But if I use the chisel tool and click on an area, it'll essentially chisel away. I'm clicking each time, and you may not see much, but that blue halo that we saw earlier should be taken care of by doing this. Okay, Brian, I'm going to go ahead and jump out of this application here. Take me back to my original now. I'm going to change the blending mode back to normal, and you'll notice I've got that. I'll just go ahead and delete this copy. I've got my mask there. Next thing I'll do is go ahead and jump up and look at our whole library of backgrounds we have built into the application, which is really cool. And there's actually a way to add more backgrounds to these categories. If you have your own JPEG files out there that you'd like to see in a category right here with your own folder name and everything, I know a way to do that. It's kind of a trick I picked up as well. So let me know if you're interested. I don't know if we've advertised that before necessarily, but it's kind of handy for your workflow if you can add those in there. So I selected a background I think will look good on this image, and I got to transform it. The cool transform tool I always recommend people use is the fill option. It'll fill the entire screen. For this particular example, I don't like it, but for studio backdrops or textures, just clicking fill will save you the time from having to grab the arrows or the edges and then go through there. But for this particular image, I'm going to try to stretch it out myself and just kind of line it up so it looks realistic as possible to what I just masked. Now I'm going to apply that transformation, make a copy, and since this background seems a little bit blown out, I'll just change the blending mode to a screen, and it'll give me a more realistic look there. Another cool trick I wanted to share with everybody was the, let me just delete this layer. Okay, I'm going to copy this current layer, and now this is the trick I was excited to show everyone. I'm just going to flip this thing over twice and put it down here, right below the other one. Apply that transformation. Jump over to the layers brush. Bring the opacity down to about 10 to 12, and make sure I'm set to paint out. Paint out in the area here. Oh, excuse me, let me go back. I was on the wrong layer there. So I'm going to go up to this layer as I paint out there. Let me go back here. Excuse me. All right, let me start that from scratch again. That's never happened to Brian before, I'm sure. All right, so I got my original here. I'm going to delete. Whoops. Copy, screen. Merge those two layers together here. Make a copy of that. This is the one I'm going to take below. Any questions out there from the audience, Brian?
Did you tell people that you can add your own JPEGs to the background library?
I did mention that earlier, and I think that probably started a firestorm because it's not a popular feature that is advertised on our website, but there is a location. I will show you that in just a second once I'm done finishing this image up here. Going to grab this brush like I was intending to do and just paint out this layer, and I need to bring the opacity down just a tad more so it has more of a realistic look, probably down to like 5. And as I click here, I can kind of paint out in the water there, and I sort of have a reflection here. If I am feeling creative, I would jump into Perfect Effects. Do we have time for that today, Brian?
Yeah.
I'll jump into Perfect Effects, and let me just merge these files together now and get it over with before I jump in there. And maybe do an HDR look. You know, this is just a picture I took with a point-and-shoot camera, and I was actually going to this picture was taken in San Francisco Bay when I was going to a San Francisco Giants game just out of the Bay. So let's take movie looks. We've got the faux HDR in here, and actually Havana kind of got a good bright look to it here, and I could blow that out if I wanted to. If I don't like that, you can either add another layer or work on the current layer that you're on. I'm going to try the faux HDR here, if I can find it. Bring down maybe some of the sharpness in that so it looks a little more authentic. And my ultimate vision is probably to blur out the edges on both sides with focal point. So my mask, my original mask that I was working on, and you probably can be critical yourself, honestly is missing some of the information on the edges. But still, I've got an image that I created that I played around with for a while. This was an image that was sitting in Lightroom for me for, it's almost 2 years now, and I haven't touched it. But for this exercise, I figured it would be a good example of some different options you can do with the Perfect Photo Suite. So remind me again, Brian, we wanted to talk about how you could add to your particular backgrounds. Okay, so I'm on a Mac machine right now, and I can show you the file path. There is a different file path for Windows, and if you want to know that, I can send that to you in an email here, and I'll just give you a quick crash course on it. Essentially, if we start off at our, start out in our hard drive, we can go to Library, Application Support, On-One Software, Perfect Mask, Backgrounds. Right here, this is the file path. And I'll have this posted. We'll give this out to anybody that wants to know. We'll definitely post this so you guys can reference it later. But if I just wanted to add a new folder there, I could add my own personal folder and import those so that they would show up when I went to File, Browse, Backgrounds. This isn't my personal machine here at work, so they're not showing up in here. But you could add folders in here, and it makes it real handy. That's almost all I had prepared for today. I know that we wanted to discuss keep and drop colors a little bit more, so
We'll just say we'll be doing another webinar later this month.
yeah, that's right. Brian, thank you. I'm actually going to be doing another webinar over Mask Pro later this month, and after my first initial one today, hopefully I'll improve on that and be able to provide people with better answers, because like I've said before, this is the most common question I get on the phone every day. As far as usage goes of our software is with Mask Pro, or Perfect Mask, excuse me. You know, we've changed the names of our products, as I'm sure you're aware of. Perfect Mask, it's got a steep learning curve, and it's not always straightforward, but it's been a lot of fun teaching you guys today some of the tricks I've learned, and hopefully I can expand on those in the future. And I look forward to it. Please do send me your questions, specifics. I hope to improve dramatically with the next one. I'm going to hand it over to Brian now to close it off.